Back in 1976, Steve Jobs co-founded Apple, and during his time at the company, he built an incredible legacy that continues to be admired today. But things weren't always smooth sailing for Steve Jobs. In fact, he was fired from Apple in 1985, only 9 years after starting the company. So in this video, we're going to take a closer look at the events leading up to his removal and investigate why it happened. This is Greg with Apple Explained, and I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you'd like to help decide which video topics I cover, make sure you're subscribed, and voting polls like this one will show up in your mobile activity feed. So you may be wondering, how can Steve Jobs be fired from his own company if he's the one in charge? And the truth is, he wasn't in charge. Jobs was just 21 years old when he co-founded Apple, and that earned him a lot of skepticism over whether he was mature enough to successfully operate a multi-million-dollar company. So to put those concerns to rest, a more experienced businessman named Michael Scott joined Apple to serve as their CEO. Steve Jobs never actually had that title until his return to the company in 1997. And while it freed up his time to lead product development projects like the Lisa and Macintosh, it also meant he didn't have as much decision-making power, and that's a big reason why he was able to be forced out of Apple to begin with. But the biggest irony is that the man who allegedly fired Steve Jobs was someone Jobs himself set out to hire. That man was John Sculley, and he played a very active role at Pepsi, where he turned around their food operations division from losses of $70 million a year to profits of $40 million. He also led research that resulted in Pepsi creating the first 2-liter bottle in 1970, and he created the Pepsi Challenge ad campaign, which was very successful in stealing market share away from Coke. So because of his impressive performance at Pepsi, Jobs poached him very aggressively for Apple's CEO position. Sculley was initially reluctant, but that changed when Jobs asked him, "Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" That sealed the deal, and John Sculley became Apple's CEO in 1983. Now, during this time, the company wasn't doing very well. They'd gone through 2 CEOs already, Michael Scott and Mike Markkula, and neither were able to create a follow-up computer to the wildly successful Apple II. The company was simply selling iterations of that product while trying to figure out what the next big thing might be. Jobs thought the future of computing would be based upon a graphical user interface, which featured a mouse, cursor, and virtual desktop with icons and folders. Jobs led the effort to create Apple's first computer with a graphical user interface, and it was called Lisa, which he claimed stood for Local Integrated Systems Architecture, but later admitted it was named after his daughter Lisa. The computer was praised for being a technical marvel, but those advanced technologies came at a cost of $10,000, and that price tag alone put the Lisa out of reach for everyday consumers, and resulted in just 10,000 sales over its 2-year lifespan. The Lisa was a commercial flop, and Apple's leadership was getting nervous. Although the Apple II was still a big seller, its days were numbered, and Apple needed a successful follow-up machine before the competition beat them to it. And something else every YouTuber or business owner needs to stay competitive is their own website, which of course you should build with Squarespace. I actually started using Squarespace a few years ago to create appleexplained.com, and I actually chose their platform since it has a super easy to use drag and drop interface and the most website templates to choose from compared to any other website builder. But what I thought was really cool is that I could add an e-commerce store to my site when I was selling merch a couple years ago without starting over from scratch. Plus, the payment processor was built in, and I could print shipping labels straight from Squarespace. But you can sell more than just physical items. It's also possible to sell digital items like ebooks and music, or services if you're a consultant or fitness coach. It really is an all-in-one platform designed to do almost anything you can imagine. And you can get all this for cheaper than you might think, especially if you use the link squarespace.com/appleexplained, since you'll get 10% off your first purchase. You can find that link in the description. Alright, so Steve Jobs led the effort on a new machine with a graphical user interface called the Macintosh. It combined the low production costs of the Apple II with the advanced technology of the Lisa, and was expected to be a hit with consumers and businesses alike. But there was one area of debate: its price. Jobs wanted to sell the Macintosh for $2,000. This would put it in a pretty competitive position against other retailers like IBM, who sold PCs for around $1,600. But Apple's CEO John Sculley disagreed. He told Jobs the price of the Macintosh should be $2,500 in order to recoup all the development and marketing costs that were incurred before its release. The two argued over this detail for months, and it marked the beginning of a war that would end their friendship for good. Because when Apple's board of directors agreed with Sculley that the Macintosh should sell for $2,500, it gave Jobs a convenient excuse to give if the product failed. He could simply say, well, of course it failed because it was priced too high. And that's exactly what happened. Despite the Macintosh being extremely well received by consumers and critics, and experiencing promising sales for its first few months, demand quickly tapered off. And again, consumers were flocking to IBM machines for the biggest bang for their buck, rather than buying a radically new and expensive machine from Apple that didn't even have much support from software developers, since writing applications for a graphical user interface was troublesome and time-consuming. This is when tensions between Sculley and Jobs reached an all-time high. The board of directors wanted Sculley to exercise more control over Jobs, who was spending his time on expensive projects that amounted in zero commercially successful products. The Apple II was still paying the company's bills, and that machine was technically created by Steve Wozniak. So Jobs really was looking to create his own hit product, but hadn't found the right recipe. The problem was, Apple's leadership wasn't going to sit around and watch him drain their bank accounts waiting for that to happen. So Sculley made the tough decision to reduce Jobs' roles and responsibilities within the company. But Jobs himself found out about this plan before he was supposed to, and he used that time to put together a plan of his own. He formed an alliance with other employees and tried organizing a coup to take over the leadership roles at Apple and force the existing members out. But it was too little too late. Sculley caught wind of this effort and called for an emergency board meeting to address the issue. And it was at this meeting when Steve Jobs was told that his day-to-day decision-making power within the company would be removed, and that he'd have his own corner office with the freedom to experiment with emerging technology as he wished, except he wouldn't be able to lead any projects and no one would report to him. Jobs didn't accept this offer and instead forced the board to vote on who they prefer as Apple's leader, himself or Sculley. But this is where Jobs made a fatal mistake. He genuinely believed that the board was on his side, so when they unanimously voted in support of Sculley, Jobs was stunned, and he stormed out of the meeting in anger. So that means technically no one fired Jobs, but he lost so much control over his own company that he preferred to leave and start a new one. That's exactly why Next Computer was founded, as well as Pixar, but that's a completely different story for another time. Also, the saga of Steve Jobs' return to Apple is just as epic, so make sure you're subscribed because I'll definitely include that topic in a future voting poll. Alright guys, thanks for watching till the end, and don't forget I do have a podcast channel that I upload to every Friday if you'd like to hear my thoughts on more current Apple topics, and I'll see you in the next video.